I don't know if you know me, I'm Arthur Faram. I'm a geoglyphologist, and a science that I discovered about 8 years ago that's been hidden from the public, and I just happened to stumble across it while I was doing my family history, which involves Celtic history for like 2,000 years. And I brought this geoglyphology to the public and discovered that it's the same sacred science that many organizations, and you know who they are, have secreted from the public for many, many years. Many of the geoglyphs, which a geoglyph is a writing or a symbol on the ground, much like petroglyphs are writings on rocks.
Could you check if people are hearing you?
Can everybody in the back hear me?
No, could you speak up just a little bit?
Well, I've got a soft voice, so it's going to be difficult for me. But I'll try. Okay.
Go ahead.
But anyway, these geoglyphs were put on the ground by the Celts and many of the people that preceded them, that passed them down to the Celts, that outlined the territories which they claimed as their own down through time. Now, if you get a carbon dating of the geoglyph, and you pretty much know who put the geoglyph on the ground, and as a result, you can follow these civilizations and cultures all over the world. Someone in the world has not taken a fancy to this, because before Google found out that I knew all about this, I had collected thousands of geoglyphs from all over the world, so I have photographic evidence of them, and I surveyed them and came up with a picture of what the world used to be. However, once I made these things public, these things started to disappear from Google Earth and all over the world, not just in the United States. So there's some organization out there that still doesn't want anybody to know about this. And one of the biggest ones that was heartbreaking for me to see is there's a giant geoglyph in Canada, which was known as the Badlands Guardian. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. There was a depiction of an Aztec Indian with a headdress, and the thing was about half a mile tall and half a mile wide, and perfect in every detail from the air, like as if somebody had painted a picture. Well, all around this, there were geoglyphs that made it clear that someone from this culture that I'm talking about had placed it there. Well, I made that public even after I knew that people were trying to take these things away, and I figured it was too big for them to mess with. I was wrong. They took a bulldozer to it and flattened the whole thing. And this was a national monument of Canada. And while I'm mentioning Canada, as you'll see a lot of the territory that is now the southern boundary of Canada used to be part of the territory that was awarded to the Templars. Now that's a whole other story, but you'll see a little bit of it here. Awarded to the Templars for helping Portugal get rid of the Moors in the 1400s. In fact, the very year, which is 1492, that the Moorish War was over in Portugal and Spain, Columbus set sail for the United States. And he'd been sitting in Spain for 6 years on a Spanish letter from the Queen, holding him back until the war was over. Well, he took off across the United States, across the Atlantic, and I'll show you a little bit more about that later. Unless you've read my books or visited one on my website, most of what I'm going to present to you will be totally foreign. I just ask that you keep an open mind and use the tools which I provide on my website to prove to yourself that there is an ancient science which I have named geoglyphology. There's the website right there. And to save time, I'm not going to, I usually go through the whole thing, the mechanics of how it works, but it's time consuming, and I think I've done it enough times now that people probably know about it. Geoglyphology was used to allocate the territories, boundaries mentioned by Plato, which were assigned to the gods in ancient times. In the presentation, I'll be using the term geoglyphs. Geoglyphs are markings made on the ground, just as petroglyphs are markings on rocks. Some of the smaller geoglyphs, which I will mention, have been crafted since the last apocalyptic event, which ushered in the Ice Age. Most of the larger pre-Ice Age geoglyphs survived the last apocalypse. However, the smaller ones were evidently destroyed and were replaced within the last 12,000 years. My task today will be to present to you just a few of the geoglyphs which reestablish the territories mentioned by Plato in his work Critias. According to Plato, these boundaries were established to outline the territories allocated to the gods. According to the ancient Japanese texts, at the time the territories were allocated, the prevailing gods were the brothers and sisters of Poseidon. As you will see, these ancient territories will reflect the current boundaries of many countries that still exist. Europe, for instance. A lot of people have poo-pooed the Bosnian pyramids, but believe it or not, the Bosnian pyramid setup is a giant geoglyph that outlines the territory of Europe back in 29,000 years ago. And the boundary still held today until the Russians invaded Crimea and the Ukraine. And now the boundary of Russia is not the same as it was in the Bosnian pyramid geoglyph. But until that time, the Bosnia geoglyph survey outlined the territory of Europe just as it is now. And I know that's hard to believe, but if you go to my website, you can prove it to yourself. You'll be exposed to concepts of sacred geometry which have been hidden for thousands of years. We are now entering the age of enlightenment, and at the time is here for these truths to be revealed. Most of us in here are baby boomers, and I'm sure you remember Woodstock, the Love Fest, and if you remember, the theme was the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Well, we are now in the age of Aquarius, and most people I've talked to agree that we have been coming down, and now the Aquarius, we're starting to start up in our enlightenment, and things should be better in the future. However, the evil is not going to go away quietly. During this presentation, I ask that you not become entangled in the geoglyphical process, but concentrate more on the results of the surveys. In school, we were taught that the Freemasons played a large part in establishing the United States. What is not known by many is that the Freemasons have played a continual role in the development of our country. You should know that I have no ties or obligations to the Freemasons. In fact, my Celtic ancestors were the last in a series of cultures who passed the information which I'm about to present down to the Masons. Now, I'm not saying the Masons started just as my wife's telling me to blow my nose.
Yes, dear.
I'm not saying the Masons did not have the information prior to the time they were established, but the current way we see the Freemasons and their name started in 1450, just as the Templars went out of phase. The Templars built Rosslyn Chapel to signify the end of their reign. A lot of people think they ended in 1300s, but they did a lot of things between the 1300s and 1450, which was the end of their reign. And strangely enough, the Freemasons started up in 1450 in Scotland when they joined and infiltrated the Wall Builders Lodge. And they renamed themselves the Freemasons. And from then on, they've been known as the Freemasons, and they continued the same information, the sacred geometry, down to now that the Templars and the people before them had perpetuated down through time. People that have read my books already know that, although there are many cultures before them. The most recent flag bearers for the ancient science of sacred geometry were the Scottish, Latin Celts, Portuguese, and the Templars. After numerous contributions to the sovereignty of Scotland, Portugal, and the United States, the Templars celebrated their retirement by the building of Rosslyn chapels in 1450 AD. When the Templars retired, the Masons were formed when the enlightened men of Scotland joined the Wall Builders Lodge and renamed themselves the Freemasons. One would have to ask why this information is coming to light now. The answer would be that we are moving into an age of enlightenment which has not been seen for millennia. I tend to speak in my presentation in a very positive manner, and I've been criticized that by some, because everybody says, I think, or I have a theory, or this is my idea. You'll find that I'm much more positive than that, because I had relatives that were in the ancient Celts for over 1,000 years as leaders of the Celtic military. Plus, and they put a lot of these geoglyphs on the ground, believe it or not. And I also have the geoglyphs on the ground, which are physical evidence you can touch and see. So I really don't feel like I have to say it could be, because it's mathematically provable and it's physically touchable. So that's why I'm so positive. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a tour from Stonehenge down through the Americas to the very tip of South America and show you what the old territories looked like in the beginning. And then I'm going to start chopping up those territories as time went by to show you what we have now. There's Stonehenge. We all know what that is. It's located in England. And although the larger columns don't figure into the geoglyph, you'll find that there's a lot of stuff in the center that does. I personally believe that that rest of that circle was either destroyed by some way, or the people that made those geoglyphs tore them down in order to use the stones for the geoglyphs. Right there you can see several rocks. Those directions there are obtained from going from that center point right there, through there, through there, through there, and so forth. There's some other ones. There's another one there. And then you have rectangular objects that project radials also. And this is pretty much consistent all over the world. There's other ways to depict direction, but that's pretty common right there. Now, if you want to know what the Celtic territory is a long time ago, and this has been proven over and over to me by a different geoglyphs, there's the Celtic territory as it existed when Stonehenge was built. As you'll notice, it goes up here to the waters of no, here's Ireland down here, but this is Norway, thank you. It goes up to the shore, which they're saying they were free to do all the oceans. And over here, we have a spot that was known back in when the Stonehenge was built, 3100 BC, that I will later show you. There's a geoglyph that they built right there at that point to give the Vikings the territory that they were to stay in when they were run out of Norway for attacking Norway when the Catholics made Norway Catholic. The Vikings didn't like that, so they attacked Norway and they ran them out to Greenland and Iceland. Well, at that very point right there, which was known 3,100 years ago, they've built a geoglyph that outlines the territory that the Vikings were allowed to stay in. And I'll show you that in a minute. Here you can see the end of the Northwest Passage. This is very important. That's the tip of the current boundary of the United States. And there's another line here, which I didn't depict, that goes directly to the eastern tip of the boundary of the United States. Now, those are very important because even though they were known 3100 BC, they still exist as the tips of the current boundary of the United States. Now, here's another important one. You have Inspiration Peak. Now, that's the main geoglyph. Most major geoglyphs will point out the geoglyph next to their territory so that you can know where to go to start the next territory, which will be North America here. And that just happens to be the one, and I'll show that to you in a minute. There's Inspiration Peak that I just showed you. This is the main peak right here. This is Park. And interestingly, Sinclair Lewis, which I call a closet Mason, everybody knew he was a Mason, but he never admitted it, went to the governor when he was alive, when Sinclair Lewis was alive, and says, "Do you know what Inspiration Peak is?" And he said no. So he was very upset and had to school him on what it was about. For further confirmation, these are geoglyphs that I've surveyed all over the world that point to Inspiration Peak as a major geoglyph. So that's kind of a confirmation. This is really a good confirmation right here. There's Inspiration Peak right there. And the situation of it is just phenomenal. It's 3,080 miles from the North Pole. It's 3,080 miles from the equator. It's 1,362 miles from the tip of the current boundary of the United States. It's 1,362 miles from the tip of the current boundary of the United States. There's 20 degrees magnetic deviation here. There's 20 degrees magnetic deviation here. So that kind of solidifies the story about Inspiration Peak, I would say. It's just coincidence, right? Okay, there's the old boundary, the Celtic boundary for the North American territory, which is this. You will find that after the British-American War, the boundaries clear up to here were decided in the treaty. And of course, instead of us having all the Great Lakes, the British were allowed to have. The British owned England and Canada, and I'll show you that. As that Celtic Stonehenge geoglyph pointed out, the British owned England and Canada. And I'll show you that why in a minute. But after the Revolutionary War, this new boundary was established here. And then this boundary was established through negotiations with the United States and England. And my question would be, why would we be negotiating with England if they didn't own it? That Medicine Hat geoglyph I told you that they destroyed, that broke my heart, is right there, which was inside the North American territory when it was built. Okay, at the end of every one of these 1,362-mile lines, there is a geoglyph to validate the place, the end of the line. This one here is on the last island below Vancouver. And there's a little square there, and you take and project the lines out from that square. And it's pretty conclusive of what the...
Is that a mound, the square?
No, I think it's just a raised, stones placed on the ground. But it's pretty conclusive of what it's trying to do. It's pointing out the current territory of the United States. There's another geoglyph up here that they destroyed. This is another one they destroyed. They destroyed that one. They destroyed that one. And every geoglyph will have a major bearing to validate that it is a geoglyph. And that's it right there. They tried to camouflage, they tried to deceive people. When they destroyed this one, they made a smaller one right here, so people would look at it and say, yeah, that's not a real geoglyph. That's a geoglyph at the eastern edge of the United States border. This is a typical geoglyph, a large circle and a small circle, and you put the pointer in the center of the large circle and go through the small circle, and I can't remember where that goes, but it goes to a major point in the world somewhere. Now that other one I just showed you has been plowed under too. Now this one is still there. This one must be on a ranch. Of course, it's in Texas, and you're going to have a tough time telling Texans to get rid of that. But this one still exists, and you can go look it up, and you can see how well that 1,300 line fits right in there. Okay, in addition to Inspiration Peak, there's another geoglyph down here that was added later that delineated what we now know as the United States. This goes right to the border below San Diego where Tijuana is. You got the tip of Florida. And I was wondering why Piney Point was picked as a place where that line went. And the reason why, but if you run a line from there through there and on down, the line meets at the intersection of the equator and Ecuador shoreline. Also, this one is 1362 from all the different places. This one is 1,170 miles from all the legs are so 1,170 miles on each one. So there you go with another coincidence. There's one of the Sulphur City geoglyphs before they plowed it under. And that outlines different places on the shore of the current United States. Okay. England owned the Celtic territory, which included Canada. Portugal owned both North America, Central America, and South America, and there are geoglyphs all over both the east and west coast to point that out, that the Portuguese owned all that. Later on, there was the Etruscans became the Portuguese, so that's just one more of the things you can trace back to the Phoenicians and on back, of people that passed down this information. So the Portuguese and Etruscans had already explored the entire Americas before Columbus came over here. This is Coral, Peru. It's a major geoglyph, and this is the geoglyph that denotes the South American territory. The main impetus on this is the non-parallel walls. None of these walls here are parallel. It's kind of hard to see it, but when you see that on an ancient site, you can pretty well tell it's a major geoglyph because it wasn't a drunk person that made them. It was a very intelligent person that made it to point to different places. There's the places that the Coral, Peru geoglyph points to. If you'll notice, you've got the most western point in South America, the most eastern point in South America, and I must have left it out, but one of them goes down here to the very tip of South America. This is very important for these lines out here to follow these islands. I've forgotten the name of the chain of islands, but this is important because what they were trying to point out, as you can see from see that line right there on the ocean floor? There was an asteroid that hit here and plowed all the way through there. And it's hard to see now, but if you look on Google Earth, there's a different color Earth from right there to right there, which indicates this whole area was plowed under at one time. Tectonic action has most likely pushed it back up again. But the point here is they want you to look in the center of this circle right there. And you'll see why in a minute. Now, here's a radial. Remember I told you that major geoglyphs usually point to the geoglyph next to them so that you can find it. That points to Chichen Itza, which I'm going to show you in a minute, which broke off Central America from the large continent of North and Central America. Now, I've often thought that the reason we're so lenient on Mexican immigrants is because this was once all one territory. In fact, I've heard some people say that someday it'll be back again. So that's something to think about. Okay, there's that center of that meteor crater again. And if you measure it from the Galapagos Islands to the center of that, down to the Santa Rosa geoglyph, which Coral, Peru pointed out, or I'd have never found it, is a perfect equilateral triangle. Another coincidence? I don't think so. And if you run that line, that point through the Santa Rosa geoglyph, you can see where it goes. So we've got South America pretty well corralled there on that geoglyph. Okay, now we're going to start cutting these three territories I just showed you apart. You had the Celtic territory, the North American territory, and the South American territory. Now we're going to start cutting them apart. Remember I showed you that Stonehenge pointed to a point where they're going to build the Viking geoglyph that told the Vikings what the territory was. Well, there it is. It's in Tikalik, Greenland. And it kind of looks like a cemetery to me. And within all this are your geoglyphs. It's kind of hard to see in this. I just wanted to get the whole thing in one picture, so it's hard to see them in here right now. There are the geoglyphs within the thing. That's the northern half of it. And you can see little squares. There's three rocks here with a center point here. There's your 90 degree that denotes the fact that it's a real geoglyph. And then you've got these walls that are not straight, but they are made that way on purpose to give you a direction. There's the southern half. You got another fixture here. As you see, it's not parallel lines, and you've got the walls again pointing to different places. Now there is the territory that was given to the Vikings. Now, while I was dealing with people that liked the Vikings, that's all I heard of was, what was their territory? What was their territory? And everybody arguing on it. There it is, right there. And if you'll remember, the southernmost point that the Vikings, the academics have said the Vikings have been found is Lafau, Newfoundland, which is right there, or Lafau Meadows is right there. That's the southernmost point that the academics will agree that the Vikings settled. Now that right there goes to Newport Tower, which will play an important part in the United States territory in a minute. As you can see, this Viking territory goes to the same place as the Stonehenge did, the western point of the Northwest Passage. You got the eastern point of the Northwest Passage. This place right here is a little island where all the seafarers got their lodestone for their compasses. As you can see, the Hudson Bay was allocated to the Vikings, but not this route right here through this area down into the United States. That's why the Templars and the Celts were at war with the Norse to recapture this area after Sinclair and the Celts came over in 1398. There's another thing that's been kept a secret. But if you read my book, I prove that Sinclair was in Baltimore, Maryland at the time, and the Faram chief of the military was in Maitland, Canada, and built a tower there, which is still there. There's the line where the old boundary of the North American and the Canadian boundary went. I put a broken line across here because at one time the Celts and the Vikings fought together. In fact, they fought together to overtake England, and that period of time in that war was called Danelaw. And if you look Danelaw up in the on Google or on Wiki, whatever it is, you'll find the Danes and the Danes and the Vikings fought side by side to capture England. At one time, the Danes were in cohorts with the Vikings, and I suspect that this line is a sign that the Vikings were still welcome within this area here, even after they were kicked out of Norway. Okay, there's Chichen Itza. That's the place that denoted the breakoff of Central America to give to the Aztecs. It's hard to tell here without measuring it, but these are not parallel lines. These are not parallel lines. The pyramid has different places it points. There's a lot of things in here that denote a geoglyph, and that's what it looks like. You got Chichen Itza here, and it shows the shoreline not encroaching on the the United States territory. Tip of Florida, the islands out here. And if you'll notice, even though it goes all the way over to the northern port of South America, it doesn't touch these because Coral Peru had claimed that already. This is beautiful. If this doesn't turn you on to geoglyphology, nothing will. This is a mural painted by Diego Rivera, the most famous painter in Mexico. He has a total museum dedicated to him in Mexico City. And you're not allowed to take any of his paintings out of Mexico. That's how well they think of him. Most of his paintings are of this type of Incan, Aztec living. And they're very colorful. And as such, they're very appealing for collectors. Now, something you'll find here interesting is you have a king and a queen. You have workers. And you're going to see that in a minute. It's going to be important. But down here, look, you've got an Egyptian. What's he doing there? Okay, to validate this painting, I got a picture of the exact spot where this painting was derived from. Now you see the land up here and the volcano in the back with the lake in the center. Same thing right here. So this is Michoacan, Mexico. And strangely enough, there's a teenage gang there that's causing heck in Michoacan. Guess what their name is? The Templars. If there's any relation, I don't know. Okay, now if you take that same mural and start plotting out, they give you the clue right there. It's due north. That's the clue. And if you use that and the compass to project these different places, you come up with the fact that Michoacan, the location I just showed you in that picture, is a geoglyph. And this points out that fact, and look where it goes. It takes in the entire area I just showed you. From the North Pole to the tip of South America, there's Michoacan. All the important places, and these places are used over and over again. I've been doing this for 8 years, and when I see a line going out, many times I know where it's going before it even gets there because these things are used so often over and over, which again shows that they're authentic. Okay, just for grins, I'm going to show you the Etruscan graves, which was a geoglyph. And the reason I'm showing them is because they had a direct effect on outlining the United States and proving that there was seafaring long before Columbus. If you'll notice these mounds here, these are graves. And they're very typical of Irish graves in Ireland. So you see a mound with an entrance, a mound with an entrance, a mound with an entrance. And if you take and project, just like in Ireland, if you take and project all those things right there, you get a geoglyph. And remember I said the Etruscans and the Portuguese worked together in 800 BC. And so they both were privy to this information. Now that's where the Etruscan territory was claimed. If you notice, it goes up to the Faroe Islands, takes in the Celtic England, stops at Norway, goes to the end of the Mediterranean, the tip of Sicily. But it takes in the Canary Islands and these islands. But the most important part is it goes down to the exact tip of South America. It goes to the exact easternmost part of South America. And this line here, as you will learn in a moment, goes to the exact point where Columbus landed on his first voyage, San Salvador. Incidentally, the San Salvador that's on the map now is not the San Salvador that Columbus landed at. I found out through research that the names have been switched to protect the guilty. And the San Salvador that you see now on the map is nothing but a small island with a flat top, barren, and if they had a 3-foot tidal wave, it would wipe everything off of it. Okay, there's that that line I was telling you that comes down to the equator and the shoreline. The tip of Baja plays an important part in all these geoglyphs of the North American territory for a long time, and you'll see why in a moment. For a long time, that's one of the most important places as a marker for territories. Now there's the Newport Tower. I think most of us know all about that. That is both an astrological and a geoglyphological geoglyph, to show that it's authentic. These are geoglyphs that I've studied all over the world that point to Newport Island. And if you look on the Perry Rees map, if you can get a good copy of it, on the Perry Rees map at Newport Island, you're going to see a bunch of little castles there, which shows it was, Perry Rees map was made in the early 1500s and depicts the eastern half of the United States and part of South America. And what he's saying when he drew the map is that Newport was already occupied in 1507, or when it was he made the map. Okay, we got Newport Tower right there, and the way I found Inspiration Peak is through some clues from Newport Tower itself, and some mathematics that went up here and over here, and there's another line here that goes back to Newport Tower. Now, this line here from the Newport Tower to Inspiration Peak is the 273 radial. Now the other line that goes from Inspiration Peak back to Newport Tower is the 073 radial. Now isn't it a coincidence that the straight line between this endpoint and that endpoint is 073, and the line that the Portuguese gave the Templars after they helped them in Portugal is 273, the exact radials of these radials right here. And again, like it goes to the tip of Baja. Now, this line is projected from Newport Tower, and Newport Tower is oriented, and I'll have to give credit for this to Scott Walter. He's the one that discovered this. I just used it. Newport Tower is oriented at 193, 13 degrees off of north. And if you take the 193 radial and bring it down here and intersect with this line right here, guess where it intersects? San Salvador, the same place that Columbus landed. Not only that, but I went to San Salvador, and I'm not going to tell you which island it is. It's not the real one. It's not the one on the map. I went to San Salvador and did a study to see if I could find some geoglyphs there. It's covered with geoglyphs that Columbus put there when he landed, and the geoglyphs outline the entire territory of the Caribbean and Mexico. There's other geoglyphs out here too, but he claimed the Caribbean, that is the Caribbean in it, but the Gulf of Mexico, whatever you want to call it. But he claimed all of this for Spain, for footing the bill for his trip over there. And it was not an expedition to go someplace we did not know. And if you read my book, it goes into real detail of why and how he did it. But the trip was to go here and place geoglyphs to claim all this area for Spain. And what happened later? Spain invaded all this territory. Okay, this is interesting. Remember I said that Portugal gave the Templars the area close to what we call the United States right now for helping them rid the Moors. This was after they got kicked out of Europe. After the Templars got kicked out of Europe, academics will say they just disappeared. Nobody knows where they went, but there's evidence that they went back to Lisbon, Portugal, and helped the Portuguese and the Spanish to kick the Moors out of, with the Moors, the Arabs, out of the Iberian Peninsula. Well, for that, since the Portuguese used to be the Etruscans, and the Etruscans and the Celts worked together, the Portuguese gave what is now the United States to the Templars, as evidenced by the geoglyphs I've just showed you. Well, there never was any formal written, now we're getting into the 1800s, there was never any formal written thing saying that the U.S. government owned the United States. So what does Portugal do, who owned all this stuff at one time? They built the Canary Islands in Tenerife. Thor Heyerdahl spent half of his life on that island trying to figure out what these pyramids were for. They were built in like 1821. They weren't ancient pyramids. So why did the Portuguese build pyramids on Tenerife Island in the Canary Islands, which they own, in 1821? Well, the answer is simple. That's the layout of the complex where the pyramids are at. Here's the reason they built that pyramid. The pyramid, like I said before, geoglyphs are to designate territories. They built those pyramids to validate that they had given the United States this territory. There you are, the tip of Baja again, the tip of Texas. If you do a perfect sacred geometry triangle from using that point and that point, you have a 30, 60, 90 triangle with the letters of the word numbers 3, 6, and 9, which are sacred Masonic numbers. This line goes to right there, and these other two lines go down here. And the territory that I outlined before for you, this line goes right here. So what they're doing is they're validating that this belongs to the United States. Now this can be confirmed by the fact that they also did these here. And strangely enough, French Guiana got their freedom at the same time, very close to when this line was built. Honduras got their freedom very close to the time that line was built. And Belize got their freedom at the time that line was built. Haiti also got their freedom at about that same time. So I'll put all those things together, and now you know why the Tenerife pyramids were built. That's Poverty Point, Louisiana. It shows you the reasons why it's a geoglyph. There's most of the mounds in the United States are geoglyphs. Most of them, it's hardly visible unless you get on Google. But most of them have, if it's a rectangular mound, it'll have a raised line down the center and then lines going to all four corners. And those, both the sides and those things are geoglyphic pointers. So there's more to mounds than most people realize. Okay, and there's Inspiration Peak, which we talked about. Now, I don't know if you know about the Kensington runestone, but in the 1800s, a farmer found a plaque with Nordic writing on it. And it has the numbers 110 and 140 within the script. Now, if you take and do geoglyphology and run the 110 radio out to Bermuda, and then you take geoglyphology and run the 140 radio down to Amelia Island, which is owned by you-know-who. Poverty Point points out those exact same places. And if you run a line from there to there, guess where it goes? To the same point we've been talking about. Oh, here's a beauty. We all know about the Louisiana Purchase. All governments of the world currently know about geoglyphology and sacred geometry. Every government in the world, all the major governments know about it. So it's not a secret. It's secret from the public. Now, if you remember, Portugal gave us this territory. And then the Spanish came in and took this and this. This was all Spanish territory at one time. Well, you probably remember President Polk with his famous saying, "Manifest destiny that we reach the West Coast." Anybody remember that? But that's why, is because he knew that we owned all this territory. And rather than fighting our way through this, he asked Napoleon Bonaparte to do the work for him. Napoleon was not at war with Spain. In fact, in order to do this purchase, Napoleon installed his brother as the king of Spain. He wasn't there long, but while he negotiated this, his brother was the king of Spain. So he negotiated with Spain to buy this property. Napoleon was a Mason. One of the provisions of the treaty was that you never sell this land to anybody else. So he agreed to that. The deal was closed. 3 weeks later, he sold it to the United States. So that tells you something right there. And later on, we had the Mexican-American War, which got us the rest of this. Here's a timeline of things that affected a lot of this. France's acquisition of Louisiana from Spain. France assumes control of the Louisiana Territory. Louisiana Territory sold to the U.S. The War of 1812 with England to try and recapture some of our territories in the Caribbean. The Battle of New Orleans and the withdrawal of England from the United States. Portugal returned French Guiana, which I just showed you. Haiti. Mexico's independence from Spain. Honduras independence from Spain. And this is when the Tenerife pyramids were built. Okay, now we've got most of our territory back, except for the parts in New Mexico, Nevada, California, which is still owned by Spain. So what happens is President Zachary Taylor, or President James Polk, sent Zachary Taylor, which is the head of the army at the time, down to the Rio Grande River and asked him to sit on the river. That southern 1362 geoglyph I told you doesn't go to the Rio Grande River. It goes to the Nueces River, which is 100 miles north of the Rio Grande. Now, the thing that started the Mexican-American War is that the United States wanted to go down all the way to the Rio Grande as far as their property goes, but Mexico knew that Portugal hadn't given them that. Mexico owned from Nueces River south. So President Polk, who's famous for the Manifest Destiny statement, sent Zachary Taylor down to the Rio Grande to put all his troops on the American side of the land and just wait. Now remember, this is Mexican territory. Sure enough, they took the bait and they invaded across the Rio Grande. And Zachary Taylor, just like all American military might does, won the war. And of course, this war went all the way down to Mexico City, known as the Mexican-American War. Okay, after the Mexican-American War, a person of knowledge, most likely a Mason, and I'll tell you why in a minute, built this geoglyph, this after Texas independence, built this geoglyph on his land to commemorate the addition of Texas to the United States. As you can see, you've got a center port, you've got those typical dots out here where you run lines through. You've got the four-sided cross that's typical way back into pre-Sumerian times. And let's see what it does. There's the radials that you can make up from that geoglyph. Let's see where those go. Those radials go there to the Rio Grande here, the Rio Grande here, 2 ports, Inspiration Peak, the boundary between Lake Superior and this lake, which is a very well-used place also. Now this is the beauty right here. There is a island on the exact border, not the Mexican, but the United States-Canadian border, which means it was named after the English and the United States negotiated that part of the boundary. This is called Masonic Island. This points right to it. It's right on the border, which meets all the protocols of geoglyphology. Now there's your 360-degree radial that has to be there to validate the thing. But once again, you've got Inspiration Peak. Remember I told you the 110 radial and the 140 radial going, look where this geoglyph goes, to the exact same point, which validates, it ties all this, the Masons, Inspiration Peak, Amelia Island, Mexican-American War, Texas, ties all this stuff together. And that's why I get such good information and why I'm so positive about what I say, is because I have tools that nobody else has got, but I'm trying to get them educated as quick as possible. Everything I do, I give out to anybody that wants it. It's on public display on my website. Okay, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, negotiated after the Mexican-American War. The treaty was signed by Nicholas Trift on behalf of the U.S. and Luis Cuevas and Miguel Archerstein as representatives of Mexico on February 2nd, 1848, at the main altar of the old Basilica of Guadalupe at Villa Hidalgo. This here is the treaty boundary, which is the current United States boundary that they negotiated. And this is the old boundary, which the Portuguese gave to the United States, which meant that the United States owned all this territory before the Mexican-American War. Well, in order to gain this territory, they evidently were ready to give away this territory. And that led to another story. When the Mexican-American War was finished, for some reason, and we all know why, they wanted to keep the treaty secret because they didn't want anybody to know we'd given away some American territory, because there were a number of people that knew about what I'm showing you. Well, the treaty didn't remain secret, and one of the senators leaked it out to the New York Times. And the reporter that printed the information was interrogated by Congress and given a 6-month sentence because he wouldn't tell who told him. Later on, they found out that the person that told him was a later President Buchanan, who was also a Mason. Okay, remember, we gave away, we were given this land up here by Portugal, and then we gave away all this with this boundary in the Treaty of Hidalgo. So that left, the senators that knew about sacred geometry and about this boundary put a bill before Congress to try and get this territory back. And this is written, I've looked it up, so you don't have to take my word for it. I looked in the Library of Congress to make sure it was right. But anyway, there was a bill before Congress to try and take this stuff back. And it failed miserably, so the boundary remained up here. But the bill included those territories right there. But it didn't include Sonora and Baja California. Well, one of the senator's son was a merchant in San Francisco, and the senator, knowing what was in the treaty and in the bill, told his son, hey, we got some land out here that nobody's claiming. And he couldn't claim this because the United States had said, no, you can't have that, but they didn't say anything about that. So the senator told his son to go over there and claim that territory. And he did. There's the flag. And William Walker went down there with some of his men and met with more resistance than he thought he would and went home. But it had a lasting impact on the situation between the United States and Mexico. Baja California didn't get full recognition as belonging to Mexico until 1954, and the treaty wasn't signed until 1972. Believe it or not, does anybody know that? Probably not. There it is. Hey, right on time.